I've prepared students for exams over the years, mainly IELTS, but also CAE, FCE. So, and there are some challenges that arise in these classrooms. So just the text types that students are expected to produce, depending on the exam, include essays, reports, letters and emails, reviews, proposals, competition entries, articles, short stories. But I've found certain times, like you can lead into a lesson and students are motivated and they're happy, and then they get a sniff of a writing lesson and say, so we're doing writing today, wonderful, fantastic. And sometimes there are groans and moans. So I found motivation can be a problem here. Motivating students in exam classes, and particularly for writing, that I found a lot of students aren't motivated to do this. They see it as a chore. So I'm not going to change your life with this talk. These are ideas that I've stumbled across or I've got from colleagues, but I just kind of put them together because they worked for me, and I'm happy to share other people's ideas with you. So I found motivation is a big problem, because like students, they're just writing their piece of writing, getting feedback, it's done, they're not communicating. So at different times, depending on the task, for example, if it's write a letter to a tourist office requesting information about that city or that country, like it's a very simple thing, but the students actually wrote their emails and sent them to the tourist office in the city where they want to go. So it's students emailing Prague and Brasilia, and the next day or 2 days later coming in and saying, I got a reply to my email, and I know stuff about Prague. And then some students coming in and say, I didn't get a reply to my email. And it's like, did you send your email to the same tourist office as these 10 other guys? It's like, yeah, okay, they're probably onto us now. And it's an exercise, but if you scatter it around a bit, it can be good. So I call this sending email. What else? Oh yeah, for stuff like reviews then, for certain exams, students have to write a review of a book, piece of music, a movie, and again, just finding an audience for them, it works wonders to motivate students. So if there's a school website where this can be posted, fantastic. If the school has a magazine, even better, or as good. But like even just the notice board in the classroom, or the notice board in anywhere in the school, and students have an audience and they can discuss it and criticize it, and again they're communicating, and it just seems an effective thing to do to get them motivated about writing. But for some tasks, you can't do the sending the email to a tourist office, because if it's write a letter to your landlord complaining about the state of your house, and you could send it to random people who may or may not be landlords, but it's not, they mightn't get the same response or the favorable response that they would like. But just introducing role play at that stage, and have other students assume the role of the landlord, send your letter to your landlord, and just having reply. So even if it's role play, having an audience, having someone who's going to reply to your piece of writing. Yeah, but with essays, how are you going to do this with essays? Well, with essays, a student writes an essay arguing for a point or a point of view. Third level education should be compulsory. So the students write their essay, and then you ask the other students, does everyone agree? No, you disagree? Here's the essay. Write a counter essay, arguing your point there. So students are communicating. There's a purpose to their writing. I give this a cool name. I call this dueling essays. Alrighty. So you have your students. They're motivated. They're full of energy. They're ready to write. And some students say, I have no ideas. I write an essay on this topic. I know nothing about advances in agriculture in the past 100 years. So you tell your students, ideas? No, you don't tell your students ideas. You tell your students, read. Okay. And of course, as teachers, introducing materials in the classroom, encouraging students to read extensively, particularly for exams where they have to write essays. Like a lot of students, depending on their background, they might not be aware of social issues, so like you need to put something in, or they need to put something in. Okay, now an obvious one is model essays, or model letters, model texts of any sort that are in most textbooks that involve writing, but actually taking a product approach to writing so students can see what they're aiming at, what the essay should look like, and stealing ideas from these essays, just input. And yeah, just planning from the process point of view, or process writing. Like to have students plan in class for their writing. It's something that I'm sure we all do anyway. Like students in pairs, arguing their points, discussing, debating, students in groups or whole class, planning a piece of writing together so students have ideas to work with. Or early on in a course, if the students do not have any ideas, there's no ideas being generated, just give students an outline of an essay saying, here are your points, this is what you're going to say, just flesh it out. And obviously that's not what you're aiming for, the end result, but it's a starting point so students can use someone else's ideas and then practice writing a letter or an essay or a review or whatever the text type is. While I was preparing for Module 1 of my Delta with Cassie here, who was great, and with some of these wonderful people over here, we did a little bit of reading. Just reading. And I came across a Scott Thornbury article that mentioned reconstructing texts. So it's basically a fancy dictogloss where the teacher comes in and reads the text to the student. It could be a letter or it could be a paragraph from an essay. And the students just sit back and listen. The first time it's read quite slowly. The second time it's read at a normal speed. And then you ask students to note down what they remember from that essay paragraph or what they remember from that essay, and ask them to rewrite the letter or the essay or the essay paragraph. And at the end of this, students have something that may or may not be approximately what you said, and it may or may not contain some of the language. Maybe you had certain target language that you wanted them to use. So at this point, once they have a first draft, you pair them up and students use the two drafts in pairs and make a third draft, taking the best of both and putting these together. And depending on the level of interest and the energy in the classroom, you could do this, ended up with the whole class looking at all the different drafts they have and then giving them the original draft and get them to notice the gap between where they're at and where they want to get at, maybe their particular structures or just the overall constructing an essay, which brings me on to structure. So students are motivated, they're full of energy, they have all these ideas and they want to structure it into a coherent piece of writing. So again, early on in the course, giving them a set plan, saying here is your structure, or maybe here is your structure and here are your ideas, flesh this out. But after a certain time, I found retrospective planning can be very useful. If students are having trouble formulating arguments or expressing themselves in a coherent way, when giving feedback on the writing, I sometimes like to make the plan that this essay appears to be based on and give back these are the key points you made. Is this what you really want to say? Is this the support for the argument you were making? Does this make sense as it is? And then students have a road to Damascus moment to say, oh, this is wonderful, my life's changed, and they rewrite the piece of writing, making the changes. And the other half of that Scott Thornbury article that mentioned reconstruction also mentioned reformulation, which I'll go into in feedback here in a moment. I know it's very motivating as a teacher when you spend some time giving great feedback on a piece of writing, and maybe you've used this fancy correction code, or you've given very nice concise comments, and you give it to the student, and the student goes, okay, and, or the student folds it up, or you see it in the bin the next day, or depending on where you're teaching, and if there's toilet paper provided in the toilets, I have seen corrected pieces of work soiled in the toilet, which isn't really motivating as a teacher. So feedback is, of course, it's necessary, but it's not just destroying a piece of writing with a red pen or with a green pen, because red pen is too negative for the student. So destroying a piece of writing with green pen and giving it to a student. Something that I still forget myself sometimes when giving feedback is to be encouraging. Sometimes it's just, this is wrong, you're breaking my heart here. I told you this yesterday, it's wrong. But encouraging, saying, yes, this is well structured, these are great ideas. Yes, you used these grammar structures that we had in class last week. Did you do that to hurry me up?
No.
Okay. And having a variety of feedback, just not having the same thing every day. Like, use a correction code as the student gets used to this, put the correction code in the margin as students get used to this, put it at the end of the paragraph, or just give them a list of mistakes or a list of good target language. In your essay, find 2 good uses of relative clauses that you use, making them aware of their own strengths as well as their weaknesses. And rewriting. Like, I'm tough on students that I just, any piece of writing they do and they get feedback, they do a rewrite and they submit it. Otherwise, it could be going in one ear and out the other. And finally, I just mentioned it very briefly, reformulation is, it doesn't work if you have a huge class, but if a student gives you a piece of writing, you can actually sometimes I rewrite the whole thing, what they were aiming at in my language, or like slightly above the language they use without the mistakes. So again, students notice the gap. Now, you can't use this with a class of 15 students, but maybe on a rotating basis. And it can be very motivating for students to say, yeah, that's what I wanted to say. That's what I was trying to say. Okay, sorry.